This literature has very ancient beginnings. It was first recorded 5,000 years ago and has since documented the dream visions of a race. It numbers about 1/5 of the world's population. Even though this literature has very ancient beginnings, Egyptian literature is much older. The origins of Chinese language are lost. There is no doubt that it is the most ancient and possibly the oldest written language still used by humans. Even though I said before that Egyptian literature is much more older than Chinese literature, the Egyptians don't use their ancient language now in the present world. It undergo a few changes because China in ancient times refused all contact with the Western world. For those of you wondering what are the few changes of the Chinese language, it's how you write the Chinese alphabet. The Chinese language has certain marked characteristics. It is monosyllabic. For example, yes, the word has only one syllable. Chinese does not have polysyllabic words like legislature. The word has 4 syllables. Monosyllabic is the word that only has one syllable. From the word mono, it means only one. Such a characteristic of the Chinese language may give you the idea that the number of the words in the language is very limited. Chinese is a tonal language. The same word changes when it is said with an upward or downward intonation or with a high or low pitch. Just like in our Filipino language, some of the words may look the same, but we use impede to give them a different meaning. There is a great difference between the Chinese language as spoken and as written. The spoken vocabulary has considerably fewer words than the written vocabulary. So, every word in the alphabet of Chinese is translated to 2 or more Roman letters or alphabets.
Good afternoon. Now let's proceed to Chinese writing. Fun fact, Chinese writing is considered as one of the most ancient and hardest form of writing. Chinese writing is somehow different to the form of writing in other countries. Instead of using alphabets, they use Hanzi, which is a set of symbols used to write Chinese. It consists of about 50,000 characters. Chinese writing is made up of ideographs. It is a symbol that represents an idea. Chinese writing works by combining signs or symbols to form an idea. In learning to write Chinese, one has to learn 214 signs instead of 26 letters. It is written from right to left in columns from top to bottom. Early Chinese literature dates back to 1000 BC. It recognizes 5 books called the 5 Classics. It is a corpus of 5 ancient Chinese books used by Confucianism as the basis of studies. These books are the Book of Changes, the Books of History, the Books of Rites, the Book of Odes, and the Spring and Autumn Annals. These are all written by Confucius. In poetry, the 4 greatest Chinese poets lived during the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty is sometimes referred to as the Golden Age in ancient China. They were in order of birth. Wang Wei, Lipo, Tofu, and Po Chui. Drama and fiction developed as important forms of Chinese literature during the 1200s. Chinese plays resembles European opera, combining singing and dancing with dialogue.
Modern Chinese literature. They developed after the 1800s when many European missionaries and traders traveled to China, and the Chinese were gradually exposed to Western culture. In 1949, the Chinese communists come to power after a long civil war. They ordered writers to create works that can be easily understood by peasants, soldiers, and workers. Also, here's a fun fact. Did you know that Chinese literature was composed by a formal written language that is called Classical Chinese? Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976. All intellectuals were persecuted in China. Political and social themes in this period dominated the published works, and some writers dared to write works that criticized the government. Also, here's a fun fact. Did you know the one who launched the Cultural Revolution was Mao Zedong, also known as the chairman of the Communist Party of China? Chinese democracy. In 1989, Chinese students and citizens demanded greater democracy and led demonstrations in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. The Chinese government arrested writers who live in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, or the United States had more artistic freedom. Also, here's a fun fact. Did you know that the Chinese democracy's new album, Guns N' Roses, sold 21,000 copies only on its 6th week of release? Major literary and intellectual fashion. The writings of the 90s also seem to reflect less of a self-conscious depth to foreign authors, perhaps in reaction to the massive importation of Western literary and cultural theories in the previous decade. So, the topic that we just discussed, major literary and intellectual fashion, shows that how the Chinese evolved through the decades and have adjusted to their culture and other stuff like that.